Have you ever noticed how some people experience every emotion as if the volume were turned all the way up? A single word cuts deep. A simple gesture changes their entire day. A misinterpreted glance can turn into hours of silent analysis, internal review, of questions that have no easy answer. And the person who lives this way didn't choose to be this way. They simply are. Psychology has a name for this. It has an explanation. And it's much more beautiful and much more complex than most people imagine. Today I want to talk about the mind of someone who feels everything intensely, not as a flaw to be corrected, nor as an exaggeration to be toned down, but as a particular way of existing in the world that has deep roots, its own logic, its own history, and that deserves to be understood with the seriousness it rarely receives. Because while the world keeps saying, "You think too much," and "Don't take things so seriously," these people continue to feel. They continue to process. They continue to carry something no one taught them how to carry. And most of them do it in silence. It all begins long before a person has words to describe what they feel. There's something researchers have identified as sensory processing sensitivity, a neurological trait present in a considerable portion of the human population. It's not a diagnosis, nor a disorder. It's not emotional weakness disguised as science. It's a real, measurable way for the nervous system to process environmental information with more depth, more detail, more layers than the average person. The brains of these people literally register more. They pick up subtleties others ignore. They process longer. They connect more dots. They feel with greater breadth. Imagine a stereo system where the equalizer is set to pick up frequencies most systems don't even detect. It's not that the sound is louder, it's that it's more complete, fuller, richer in detail, and at the same time, much harder to filter when everything comes in at once. But this trait doesn't appear in a vacuum. It encounters an environment, and the environment responds. Childhood plays an absolutely central role in this story. When a child is born with this more finely tuned nervous system, they start to notice things that adults around them often don't even perceive. The tension and the silence between parents during dinner. The subtle difference in the teacher's tone of voice when she's short on patience. The physical discomfort of an environment that's too noisy, too bright, too socially intense. And they feel all of this. They feel it with a force that can't be turned off. The problem isn't sensitivity itself. The problem begins when the surrounding environment doesn't know what to do with it. But before I tell you that, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, okay? Let's go. The first signs appear early, very early. The child cries more easily than others, reacts more intensely to frustrations that seem small to outsiders, gets emotionally hurt when other children of the same age seem to simply not care and move on. They take longer to process a fight, a disagreement, a change in routine. They need more time, more space, more attention to what they're feeling, and what they receive most of the time is the opposite. They're called dramatic, too sensitive, overreactive, spoiled. Sometimes with genuine affection, the kind that tries to help but doesn't know how. Sometimes with real impatience, the kind that's tired of dealing with something they don't understand. But almost always with the same implicit message: the way you feel is wrong. It's too much. It's inconvenient for others. And here's one of the points that impresses me most in this whole story. A point I consider fundamental to understanding what happens next. The child doesn't learn that they feel a lot. They learn that they are too much. This distinction seems small when you first hear it, but it's enormous when you stop to think about what it means to carry that. Feeling a lot is a characteristic. It's something you have, something that's part of how you function, something that can be understood, embraced, even celebrated. Being too much is an identity. It's something you are, something that defines your worth. Something that needs to be corrected so you can be more acceptable. When a child absorbs this second version of the story, and they do absorb it because children are sponges for narratives about themselves, they begin to build a very specific relationship with their own emotions. A relationship based on distrust. They learn that what they feel can bother the people they love, that expressing it can scare, can push away, can create problems. That their intensity has a social cost they don't know how to pay. And so they start to manage, to filter, to hide. But emotions don't disappear when they're hidden. They accumulate somewhere that has no name in childhood but that gains weight over time. Social reinforcement does the rest of the work over the following years. As this person grows and moves through different environments, school, friend groups, first relationships, the working world, they continue to encounter the same message in different forms. There's always an unstated pattern, never openly discussed, but absolutely present. How much feeling is socially acceptable? There's an implicit emotional ceiling, and those who feel beyond that ceiling learn, in increasingly sophisticated ways, that they need to hold back. Some learn to hide their intensity behind humor. They turn what truly hurt into a joke, because the joke is accepted and the pain isn't. Others develop an almost perfect composure on the outside, calm, stable, functional in appearance, while inside there's a constant turbulence no one sees. There are those who isolate themselves to feel in peace, without needing to explain or justify what they're feeling to someone who will diminish it. And there are those who become extraordinarily empathetic with others, because they intimately understand what it's like not to be emotionally accompanied, but who rarely receive the same attention and care in return. The world teaches, in very subtle and very efficient ways, that emotional intensity is a social burden, that those who feel a lot are difficult to deal with, that the balanced, serene person who doesn't take things too seriously is easier to love, easier to be around, easier to admire. And people who feel everything intensely learn this lesson very well, perhaps too well. But there's something this social learning doesn't teach, something that's left out of this whole narrative. That this same intensity the world treats as an inconvenience is also the source of some of the richest, deepest, most genuine experiences a human being can have. The world doesn't tell this part, and so it remains hidden, buried under years of "you're too much." Over time, the pattern solidifies in a way that goes far beyond the emotional. The person who feels everything intensely develops an extraordinarily complex inner world. They think deeply about things others dismiss in seconds. They connect experiences in ways few can see. They feel gratitude in a way that gives them chills. That kind of gratitude that makes a person stop in the middle of the day because of an evening light, a piece of music, a small gesture from someone they love. They feel loss in a way that lasts. They feel love with a depth and surrender that few can match, and which sometimes frightens precisely because it's so real. And at the same time, they feel rejection as if it were total abandonment. They feel criticism as if it were a definitive sentence about who they are. They feel someone's casual indifference as a kind of small death, the kind no one attends the funeral for, but that hurts just the same. Not because they are weak, not because they are immature, but because the same nervous system that amplifies joy also amplifies pain. Because the same equalizer that picks up the most subtle frequencies of beauty also picks up the most subtle frequencies of loss. This is one of the most important parts to understand, and I want to say it clearly because I think many people have never heard this directly. There is no selective intensity. You can't turn up the volume only for good experiences and automatically turn it down for bad ones. The volume is singular, and it's always at maximum. So when someone says, you need to learn not to take everything so seriously, that person isn't wrong from a practical standpoint, but they're asking for something that is biologically much harder than it seems. It's like asking someone to hear less, to see with less clarity. The processing has already happened before any conscious decision. The intensity has already arrived. The emotion is already in the system. The question isn't about feeling less. The question is what to do with what has already been felt. And that's a completely different question. And here we arrive at the consequences. The ones that happen slowly, that no one names, that the person themselves often doesn't recognize as a consequence of anything. Living with the volume on maximum is exhausting. Not in a dramatic or outwardly visible way, in a silent and cumulative way. The kind that weighs down over the years without the person knowing exactly where the tiredness comes from. The person who feels everything intensely expends an enormous amount of energy simply to function in daily life, which others navigate with much more ease. Every social interaction carries weight. Every difficult conversation needs to be processed before, during, and after. Every decision carries layers of nuances they can't ignore, even when they want to. Every conflict, even small, even fleeting, even clearly resolved, needs to be digested internally in a way that takes time and energy. They can't simply let it go. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're looking for trouble, but because their mind has already taken that information, already started to analyze it, already connected it with previous memories, already produced interpretations and questions. The train has already left the station. There's no stopping in the middle and getting off. And when this exhaustion isn't recognized, when people around them say, "You think too much, forget about it, it's no big deal," you need to learn to relax. A very specific loneliness sets in. A loneliness that isn't about being physically alone. It's about existing on a frequency others don't tune into. It's about trying to describe a color to someone who has never seen it and realizing the words just don't get there. Over time, some of these people begin to carry a question they don't ask aloud, but that's always present in some corner. Is there something wrong with me? Would it be easier if I felt less? Would I be happier if I were different? And this question, in itself, is a form of internal violence. Silent, sophisticated, built over years of absorbed external messages, transformed into an internal voice. But there is a moment, a turning point that isn't the same for anyone, but that has something in common across all stories. For some, it arrives after a relationship that ended in a way they couldn't understand, where they loved with everything and received much less in return, and spent months trying to figure out where they went wrong. For others, it comes after an unnamed burnout, a tiredness so profound it wasn't physical and didn't pass with rest. For some, it comes after a conversation, a text, a video, something that suddenly precisely named what they had been experiencing for decades without being able to articulate. The moment of breakthrough is this, when the person realizes, for the first time in a way that truly reaches their core, that intensity isn't the problem. That the problem was always the narrative about intensity. That they spent years trying to fix something that wasn't broken. I need to be direct here because this matters a lot. Most people who feel everything intensely have spent an enormous amount of time and energy trying to become less. Trying to moderate, diminish, control, adjust the volume to a level that would be more comfortable for others around them. And that energy was real. That effort was real. That cost was real. Immense energy that could have been directed elsewhere, to understand what their intensity reveals about them, to find environments where it's welcome instead of merely tolerated, to build connections with people who don't need to be shielded from the depth they carry. The moment of breakthrough is when they stop trying to be less and they begin, slowly, with initial distrust, with frequent relapses, to understand what it means to be exactly who they are. The transformation that can happen from here isn't a dramatic change in character. It's not a motivational turnaround. It's not, I learned to control my emotions and now I'm fine. This script is more subtle, more honest, and longer than any simplified version suggests. What changes isn't the intensity. What changes is the relationship with it. The person doesn't feel less. The volume doesn't drop, but they start to have more internal space for what they feel. An ability to observe emotion without being completely swallowed by it, to feel the intense pain of criticism and at the same time recognize that criticism doesn't define who they are, to love with depth and at the same time understand that the love they feel is real and valid regardless of how the other person responds. They begin to realize that they can feel the turbulence and still carry on. That intensity and clarity are not opposites, that it's possible to be a lot, deeply, completely, and still be okay with oneself. And they begin to see something that changes how they view themselves in the world. The intensity that for so long was treated as a burden, as a problem, as something to overcome. This very intensity is the origin of everything most singular about them. Those who feel everything intensely love with a surrender that is genuinely rare. They care with an attentiveness few can offer. They create, observe, perceive connections, go through experiences with a depth that is only possible because the volume is on maximum. The world benefits from these people in ways it doesn't know how to recognize. I want to end with something that needs to be said clearly, without beating around the bush, without softening it to fit better. If you recognized yourself in any part of what was said here, if at any point you thought, that's exactly it, if you felt a strange relief seeing something described that you could never name, I want you to know that what you experience isn't an exaggeration. It's not emotional immaturity that needs to be overcome. It's not something that makes you harder to love, even if someone has suggested that at some point. It's a way of existing in the world, A way that has real costs, yes. That can be exhausting, yes. That requires awareness, care, attention, not to be eliminated, but to be sustained. But that also carries within it a capacity for depth, for presence, for genuine connection that most people will never experience in the same way. You don't need to learn to feel less. You can, with time and with much more kindness toward yourself than you've probably had until now. Learn to carry what you feel better. And that is completely different from diminishing it. There's something I genuinely believe after much thought on this topic. People who feel everything intensely are not the most fragile in the world. They are, often, the most honest, the most present, the most courageous in a way that is rarely recognized as courage, because they can't truly feign indifference. They can't comfortably live on the surface for long. They can't love halfway without feeling the weight of the other half that was left out. And in a world that so values composure, practicality, emotional detachment as a sign of maturity, carrying that emotional honesty day after day in environments that often don't know what to do with it requires a courage that is almost never recognized as such. But it is courage, yes, profoundly. To feel everything intensely and remain present. To continue connecting. To continue loving deeply, even knowing how much it hurts when it's not reciprocated. To continue being real in a world that frequently rewards the superficial. This isn't weakness in disguise. It's one of the most courageous ways to exist that I know. And you who do this every day, often without anyone noticing, without anyone thanking you, often without even recognizing it as an accomplishment yourself, deserve at least this: to be seen clearly, to be understood without judgment, and to know, in a way that finally sinks in, that you are not alone on this frequency. Never have been.